everyone. Welcome to episode 17 of On My Studio Table. Behind me I have a silk scarf which was given to me a little while ago. I think it's vintage, and I actually eco-printed it with eucalyptus leaves in a pot of onion skins. And I love the warm orangey brown colours on it and the string lines near one end of it. This is hung over a hanger, so it's actually twice the length that you see. It is reversible also, because I didn't use any barriers or anything to protect one side while I was eco-printing it. It's available in my online shop, and it really does look lovely when you wear it. I have also modelled it with a jacket that I eco-printed, and I'll share a photo of that later in the video. The jacket is also silk, I just haven't shown it here. So this video is going to be focused on eco-printing on paper. As you know, I eco-print on both paper and fabric. And paper is something that I really love to do, and it's great for beginners also because it can be more forgiving with the results than fabric is unless you know a little bit more about it. So it's a great way to start. I have a free tutorial on my YouTube channel, and I'll share a link to that below this video in the description. It is one method of eco-printing on paper. In this particular one, I use heavy weights on top of stacks of paper with leaves and so on in between. And the instructions are simple to follow, and hopefully if you try it, you'll have some good results also. There is another way to do it as well, and I'm tending to do the second way more often these days. And that is, I wrap them around either rustic cans or copper pipes, and sometimes even glass jars before I cook them. The glass jars don't break because you don't put them into boiling water. You actually let it heat up from cool so it doesn't shock the glass. I've had no problems with it if I do it that way. But generally my preference is rustic cans and copper pipe. And I layer the papers together, sometimes 3 layers with different leaves in between and other materials, sometimes rusty nails, rusty washers and that kind of thing. I also dip the papers beforehand in different solutions. My general dipping solutions involve either tannin made from used tea bags in a strong solution, or dipping them in iron water, which I've made myself. And these give you really good results. Different papers will also make the results vary from one kind to another, and it's worth experimenting with things like watercolor paper, sketchbook paper. I've even used thin card, and also if you're stacking them you can get interesting results from just corrugated cardboard from boxes. And the bonus with those is that when they're wet you can peel the layers apart, so you end up with maybe 3 or 4 layers of interesting papers. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you some photos of the papers which I did in the video, and then I'll show you some other things I've done with paper, including ideas on what to do with them, because sometimes you can do all this eco-printing and then you think, what am I going to do with all this? And I tend to make things like books, sometimes smaller or thicker books with different kinds of binding. I use them to make greeting cards, and I've even used them for sculpture. Collage is another lovely way to use eco-printed papers. So I hope you get some ideas from this video, and I also think that you'll enjoy the process. You can use leaves from your garden. They will work in different ways depending what you dip your papers in. Some leaves will work better than others, but that's the best way to learn. You'll find out what's growing in your area or even in your garden, and find out what really works for you. The other thing that I'd like to share with you is the triptych that I've been working on. If you've been following me on Facebook and Instagram, you will have seen some of the stitching that I'm doing. I'm now on the second panel. I actually tried something a bit different because there was a hole on the second panel, and I'll leave that till later in the video to explain to you what I've done. So enjoy, and thank you so much for joining me. card, or actually two cards. One of them is an accordion style, and one of them is just a single fold. So this one is the single fold, and all I've done is just folded this in half and stitched some paper inside. And rather than waste paper, I fold the inside offset so that you've got an offset page there to write on, and I really like that look. And of course my business card inside, and I use recycled paper envelopes. This one is the accordion one, and similar idea, except that I've done one little page in there and then another one on the back. So if you wanted to write a letter to someone for their birthday, or just even a short note, this is ideal for that. You can probably see that there are Banksia prints here, and a bit of eucalyptus and a bit of fern, and I love experimenting with the different things that grow on our property. Here's another example of what you can do with eco-printed papers. What I've done is I've machine stitched some pieces of eco-printed paper on top of this layer of corrugated cardboard, and I just love the way you can peel the layers apart when it's wet. So I use this cardboard to either clamp together or weigh down stacks of papers for eco-printing, and then it gets the lines from the racks on it, but it also gets some eco-prints, and you can just see one up the top here, and sometimes it'll get bulldog clip prints on it, and it's really quite interesting what happens. And I used a slip knot binding for this. You might remember that I did show this in a video a little while back. And I've just used bits and pieces that I had. They're all different sizes. Most of them I haven't trimmed very much, and I love the uneven pages. This is something that I think might be a bit of a trademark with the things that I make. And I've just mixed a whole lot of different ones together, some darks, some lights, and I really love how it's turned out. That's from an old project that I've recycled. And there's a layer of corrugated cardboard on the back. So the bottle cap on the front I think is just the right touch as well. But the slip knot binding I learned from Lisbeth Degn, I think you pronounce it, of Dragonkunst, and she has a lovely tutorial about how to do this. So I will share the link in the description. These are some books that I've done, or maybe I should call them booklets. They're not very big, but I just love how they've come together. And these are 5-hole pamphlet stitch construction, and again I've kept the papers the size they were and overlaid them on top of each other so that the cover looks really interesting. And then I've just put some hand-torn white printer paper inside for writing and drawing. My stamp, who made it, and my inventory number. And I just really love playing with different formats. This one's paler. Bit of grape hyacinth there. Some of these were done in heat press, so they are a bit lighter. I only had a domestic heat press, but my aim is to get an industrial one so I can really experiment with this. This was done on grey paper, and then a different one inside with more orange hues, white paper again, and I just really love the string lines, of course. So you can just play with different combinations of papers. The blue is from Cotinus. I have a small bush growing in a pot, and I can usually only harvest a few leaves. But when it gets bigger, I will do more eco-printing with that. There's another little bit of Cotinus in there. Bit of Japanese maple. We've just planted our Japanese maples, or one of them anyway, in the yard, in the front yard, and got one more to plant, and then one or more silver birches. So this is another pale one, and again the white pages. So whichever part you look at is always interesting. Nature is wonderful. I do love collaborating with what's around me to make unique things. I thought you might enjoy seeing some close-ups of the papers that I did in the little video that I made. It's a mini tutorial, and as you can see, I've used rose leaves, and if you're wondering what the blue came from, that is actually from dried blue pea flowers, which are a type of tea, and they were given to me as a possibility for natural dyeing. Here are some of the peeled apart layers of cardboard that I mentioned, and you can see the weight, which was a can, has made a mark on the cardboard. And some of the leaves have also printed on the cardboard where they were weighing down the stacks. And the rough side of the cardboard is also interesting, and I did use it in a project. This is an accordion book which I printed on Winsor & Newton watercolour paper, and it's actually a beautiful paper to work with, and the colours are wonderful. It's expensive, but it is worth doing. As you can see, I've used blue pea flowers again. I also used some used avocado skin or seed dye, which gives it some of the orange tones, especially on the front cover. And I used white paper with a pamphlet stitch to put it together. I really loved making this book. I tried out a different type of binding, which meant I had some long strings on the spine, and they were perfect for adding beads. I do have a big collection of beads, so it was lovely to use some of them up. And inside I used an array of papers so that it would have interest and texture inside for collage and so on. This paper sculpture features giant oak leaves. You can see some in the close-up photos. They were given to me from a friend's garden. There is quite a bit of iron in the solution that this paper was both dipped in and cooked in, and you can see that with the colours that show up on it. I called it Aftermath because it reminds me of the aftermath of a bushfire. I mentioned in a previous video that we have eagles in our area and we often see them flying over our property. So this eco-printed paper, it's actually a pair of papers, I featured the Tasmanian wedge-tailed eagle. It's an endangered species, so it's always a privilege to see it, and I loved how these turned out. I've actually done a lot of collage with my eco prints, and this is a series that I did called Bushwalk, and it gives you a good overview of what the possibilities are. Sometimes I use strips, mostly they're cut or torn, and then I'll add stitch. Sometimes I use a glue stick as well, just to hold them in place while I'm stitching, but it's only just enough to adhere it because otherwise it gums up your needle when you're trying to sew it. These are all hand done, and I've used fine stitches and bigger stitches depending on the effect that I wanted. A back stitch, a stab stitch, some cross stitching, just whatever suits the piece. This is not a very thick book, so I called it a folio, and it has various widths of paper, which gives a very interesting edge to the book when you close or open it. I mixed it with plain white papers also, so that whoever uses the book can choose to do some drawing or collage, and the eco-printed papers are lovely in between the white pages. This is cardi papers, and I love the rather rough edge of the cardi papers also. I used some recycled packaging for this stab-bound book, and the black bit of tape was already on it and I couldn't take it off without damaging it, so I left it as embellishment. And this gives you a view of the binding and also the different pages that I've incorporated in this little book. I did mostly eco-printed papers, but I also used some of the cardboard layers from corrugated cardboard and incorporated them into pages and also for the back cover. Because I mostly tear the pages, whether with a metal ruler or just freestyle, the pages have lovely texture to the edges, and I love it when you see the whole book together and you just see all the pages and all the textures on the edge of the book. The back of the book is also interesting. It features bulldog clips, and these actually eco-printed onto the cardboard that I used to keep the layers together. And I really like that effect, so I made it a feature on this book. And the stab binding, of course, also shows on the back, and this is how it looks on the back of the book. I really love making cards, and I love adding text as well. So you can see that here I've added some handwriting because of the theme of the cards. I've also used text paper in a lot of these designs, sometimes from thesaurus pages and sometimes dictionary pages. And I really enjoy putting the different elements together. On these cards I've used tea bag paper, and when I emptied them, I didn't totally separate them, so these are a double layer, which gives them quite a rich colour. I've also added excerpts from my journal writing. And of course, sheet music is a lovely feature. I find damaged sheet music in thrift shops. I don't break up good copies of sheet music. Most of these are vintage. The paper can be quite fragile, as also in these torn pages from a dictionary, I think. So you need to be careful and adhere them well. Buttons also make a great addition. And sometimes I don't add any text at all. So in these cards, I just let the eco prints shine. They feature eucalyptus leaves from our property, and they always are so rewarding to use. Here I've added some cardboard from the boxes that I cut up to use to clamp the piles together, as you'll see in the video. Every year I make my own Christmas cards, and this is an example featuring a little bird and a feather stamp done onto vintage dressmaker tissue. My letter stamps also have come out for these two designs. I also experimented with free-cut Christmas trees, and I deliberately made these look a little bit funky. In my introduction, I mentioned that I now do most of my eco-printing on paper using rustic cans and copper pipe. So here they are, much used and still very usable. The rustic cans do disintegrate after a while, but then you can use them to make your iron water, so they are never wasted. This container has some liquid from my dirty pot, and this works very well also as a dipping solution, besides the iron water that I make. And tea, of course, is a great source of tannin. I save my tea bags because I drink black tea, and I make a strong solution, and this is also used for dipping my papers in. I often do tea dipping because it's so accessible. Here I have some bundles wrapped ready to go into the pot. I've used wool to tie them, and the wool will dye as well, so it's a bit of a bonus. I also mentioned that I like to use bottles occasionally. Here are some wrapped around bottles, and as I said, if you heat the water up from cold, you'll have no problems with the glass breaking because you use a gentle heat, as you do when you preserve food. This has been wrapped with t-shirt yarn, which I sourced from our local recycling group, but you can also make your own from recycled t-shirts. And my most treasured possession is my laundry boiler. And here I've added some eucalyptus leaves to the mix, and as you can see, the pot liquid is quite dark because I keep reusing it. I've just hung up 2 panels of my Triptych just to get a good look at them, and even so I can't get back very far because my studio is quite small, but you can get the idea anyway, and I do like how they're looking. I've done quite a lot of stitching on them, and I'll show you in some close-ups shortly, but I'm really happy with how they've turned out so far. The third panel is a bit darker, so that will go in the middle. These are the 2 side pieces, and as you can see, they go darker the further they go down, and they nearly reach the floor, so they're quite long. And then here's the next one. And who knows how much stitching I'm going to end up doing on these. Not too much, I think. I don't want to obscure the Ecoprinting. It's really blowing a gale outside. We have had gale force winds for weeks, and we had a bit of respite over the weekend, but now it's really blowing again. I do worry about fallen trees actually. So I hope you can't hear it on this recording. There was a small hole on the second panel, so what I've done is I've done some needle felting on it and then added some embroidery, and I think it works. I'm not 100% sure. I have added some more blanket stitch to make it tie in better with the other stitching that I've done. So I'd like to know your opinion if you'd like to make a comment. I possibly will need to add some of similar design to the other panels. As you can see, I've not only used blanket stitch, but I've also used seed stitch, and I really am enjoying the process. And of course it's so lovely working with wool. This is vintage wool from an old blanket, and I do have a few that I've collected from thrift shops and also on Facebook Marketplace. And I really love the colours as well. They just seem to not only contrast with the background fabrics but also coordinate with them, if that makes sense. I still need to add some seed stitch to some of these areas, and I'll just keep working on this, and I'll share a bit more about it from time to time.